back out in the garage today. It's time to finally get this thing measured up for some bearings. I've been putting it off. I've been sick most of this week and I ain't feeling great right now either, but I need to get this done because I got to get some stuff ordered so that it gets here in time. Granted, the weather's not exactly cooperating. I'm not worried about getting to the track anytime soon, but I just need to get things rolling and get this thing back together because it's kind of all over my garage and taking up space. So with that said, this video and today's project is going to be how to properly measure a crank and cases for bearings so you don't have to second guess plastic gauge or anything else, and you'll know exactly what you need to get. I know you can do the color coded thing where you can read the code on the cases, code on the crank, and then that corresponds with a color bearing that we would use to get those clearances. I'm going to show you how I do it to get the clearance I want, knowing hard numbers, not just, this journal or these cases were this size when they were new and everything just would correspond over. I don't run factory specs, so that color coding system's kind of irrelevant for what I'm doing. I really do like having a hard number, knowing exactly what I have for a clearance, and I don't want to use plastic gauge because it kind of, it's even get you in the neighborhood, I guess, but it's a little more critical, a little more important to me to just have the hard actual numbers, and I can make my tweaks where I feel needed. If a certain color bearing gets me my clearance on 3 journals, but it maybe is a little tight on the 4th, I can make that adjustment and know exactly what I'm doing. So with that said, you can see I have some stuff laid out on the bench here. I'm going to show you how to do this with just some basic measuring stuff, a little bit of math, and then just a little bit of understanding. So I hope this helps you maybe learn how to do this yourself. I'm going to break it down. I am no expert on any of this. This is just what I've learned to do over the years and how I come to make sense of it myself. So we're going to get started with Mike and the crank and see what we got for sizes on that, and we'll go from there. So I'm struggling to get this going here because I'm coughing like a son of a gun, but a little Doc Brown celery soda to keep things lubricated, trying to calm the cough down. But bear with me on this one. So what I got going on here is the crank is ready to get measured up. I have a hokey little crank holding fixture board I made when I was doing the crank for the Dodge motor. I'll show you what I use it for and how it works. It was just a simple little deal. I made up a little worksheet so I can record what I'm going to be measuring. And this is all I'm using for tools. Nothing super high end, pretty simple stuff you can get just about any sort of, I would say machinist store, but we actually have one of those locally. But you can get this stuff anywhere. I believe majority of this stuff, it came off of Amazon. So this is a Fowler bore gauge. It's a not high end, but it's a better reputable brand. And I got a 1 to 2 inch mic, some snap gauges, and a dial indicator. And we're going to start inspecting the crank and measuring. So we'll start with the basics of using or getting the crank in my little stand here, and we're going to do a little inspection with the dial indicator, and then I'm going to show you how we get micing and getting our sizes. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is, this is my fixture for the crankshaft. I'm just going to set the crank in here. This is just some wooden risers screwed to an old piece of shelf board with some plastic liners screwed down on these standoffs. So the crank, we'll put a little bit of oil on these, and then the crank can spin on them without marring up or scratching the journals. So it's as simple as just setting it on there. They're radiused out so the crank kind of centers itself, and then we can spin this thing nice and easy. All I'm going to do now is I just want to check the crank, make sure we don't have anything goofy going on before we get too far into the rebuild and realize we got a crank that's bent or something silly's going on. So we just got a simple magnetic base dial indicator setup, and I'm going to start right in the center of the crank because that'll give us the fastest indication of this thing being bananaed in some fashion. And then if you notice, I got a metal strip screwed down on the back side of this board just for using the dial indicator. It's back here. So I can snap this thing down on there how we need it. We'll get her into position. And then I'm not worried about zeroing the gauge. We're just looking for run out at this point. Now I'll get you down a little closer here. All right, just for reference, I did decide to zero the gauge so you can actually see the movement a little better in relation to what's going on. But all I'm going to do is lightly, I'll do it by the crank gear here. I'm just going to lightly rotate the crank. We're going to look for run out on that gauge or on the indicator. As you can see, we are not moving other than the fact I bumped it with my thumb. Well, that didn't help nothing. But all we're looking for is some, major movement from that needle, and we got nothing, which is what we want to see. It's how it should be. So this is just one of those things. Is it necessary to do? I don't know. I just like to confirm that everything is good before I put too much effort into it. But we'll go to the next journal and we'll just double check everything, because this will actually give you true, double check that the journals are actually round as well, not only that the crank is bent. But we'll move to the next journal over and down here, and we'll double check that. All right, so we confirmed that the crankshaft is not bent and the journals are very, round, which is what we want. Everything's running true. I got a little worksheet made up here for I'm just going to write down the info as I get it. It's just a way to keep things organized. I do this basically every time I go through the motor, and I do it a little different every time because I find a little way to make it a little more, cleaner or tidy it up a little bit. What I'm going to do is go through, and we're going to get the case bores for the mains, 1 through 5. We're going to measure the inside diameter of the rods, 1 through 4. We're going to write down the journal size on the crank, 1 through 5 for the mains, and 1 through 4 on the rods. And then we're just going to record our difference. And that's how we're going to end up starting to calculate our oil clearance that we need or what we want to run. So for now, we're going to get going on miking the crank. And if you've never used a micrometer before, there's no reason to be afraid of these things. I'll do a quick breakdown on reading these things quick, but it's nothing special. It's just looking at whole numbers and writing down what you see. All right, quick lesson on reading a micrometer, because I know a lot of people are afraid of these things, and I think this is what they think they need to take their engines to machine shops for, is to have the correct readings done. You can do this yourself. There's no science to this stuff. So I have a 1 to 2 inch mic, which all that means is my first number is always going to be 1 inch, and it will only read up to a maximum of 2 accurately. Sometimes you can open these up past 2 inches. It's just like don't use it as a C-clamp, but it works like a clamp. But thread it in, thread it out. But over 2 inches, your readings will stop. You won't get an accurate reading. So if it was like 2 inches, 25 thousandths of an inch or something, you wouldn't know that. It would just stop at 2 inches. So that's all that reads, or all that means. It's just your scale, your range of accuracy. So let's say we're measuring something that happens to be 1.25 inches. So your first number, obviously, from here is going to be 1 inch. Then if you come down here, your scale along this here, focus, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are your tenths of an inch. So that would be 1 point, whatever number this lands on, this line here. So if we're shooting for 1 inch 250, you would be in this area here. So we'll go down to the 200 mark. So right there, see where the 0 comes back around to our main line there? So right now we're at 1 inch 200 even. You want to be able to see that line, that's what that means. And then because our 0 is lined up, we know we're at 200. Now every rotation of the thumb wheel here is 25 thousandths. So we come back around, we're screwing it out, back to 0. Now you can see, you can just make out the next line after 2. So now we're at 1 inch, 200. We rotated out one more turn, 25. And we're trying to get to 1 inch, 250. So we rotate it back out again, one more full turn, another 25 thou. Now you can see, you can just make out the second line. So we're at 2, 25, 50. And the 0 is lined up. So now we're at 1 inch 250. It's that easy. You would just start out farther, obviously, and then you would dial it in until you got snug on whatever happened to be miking, like my fingers here, and you would just take your reading by looking at full marks. And say you're measuring something now that's within tenths of a thousandth of an inch. So we'll take her back to our 1 inch 250. So there's 200, 25, 250. Now let's say that 0 doesn't quite line up. You're a little bit on the loose side yet. It's a little bigger than 250, so you're past that 0. Now you're going to get your tenth scale. All we're looking for here is which one of these lines lines up with over next to it. And we're pretty close at focus. Get my screwdriver out of there. So now I got the focus. So we're at 1 inch 250, 1.250. Now we're going to add where we line up here at, well, I bumped it, but we were lined up at the 6. So we'll just move that line there. So you see that line right through here? The 6 lines up. So that's 1.250 and 6/10 of a thou. So we're out to the 4th digit here. So that's all that means. Easy enough. You're looking at whole numbers and lining up lines. They're that easy to read. So now we're going to go ahead and mic the actual crankshaft, and we're going to record our numbers. So what I'm going to do now is measure my main journals. We're not going to worry about the rods right now. We're going to worry about doing the mains and the cases. So I'm going to start left to right, just like as if I was sitting on the bike. The motor left to right, 1 through 5. So we're going to get going on measuring that. All right, well, since where the last segment left off to this segment you're seeing right now, it's been about 2 weeks. I've been sick, and I'm starting to get over it. My voice is a little bit shot. I'm coughing and rattling a little bit, but I got my Green River to help, calm that down right now. I am tired of drinking water and Airborne and Emergency and all the other mixes and stuff I could think of to try to get through the day at work. I'm over it. I'm having myself a treat. But, yeah, it's been 2 weeks since we left off. Without looking back at the videos that I've made previously, or the segments I should say, I don't exactly remember where I left off, other than I think I was getting ready to do some measuring. So I got my measuring stuff all laid out, so I think that's what I was doing when I was out here last. Kind of getting myself reacquainted with the place. I've missed being out here. But I think that's what I'm going to do. I remember going to do some measuring for some bearings. I think we learned how to read a micrometer and lay out a note sheet, judging by the way I have a note sheet laid out. But I'm going to pick up where I left off. I got 2 journals measured apparently. I'm going to double check my work, obviously. But yeah, I'm going to do some measuring quick, and then I think, judging by the bore gauge I got laying out, I think I was going to put the cases together and measure those too. So, see, medication does wonders, I guess. Yeah, so I'm going to finish making notes, and then we'll do we'll put the cases together that I got sitting right here. I will put them together. I'll show you how to use or how you can use a dial bore gauge and get that set up to get proper readings, and then we'll figure out exactly what we need for bearings. Because at this point, this whole ordeal is 2 weeks behind. Luckily, my piston rings haven't shipped yet, which is fine. I knew that was going to take a while because they're made to order. But yeah, I need to get going on getting these bearings coming. So pick up where we left off, and we'll check in a minute after I got some math done. So hang in there. It's like life-saving. I have the crankshaft all measured up. Got my notes here, what size my journals are, all the mains, all the rods. Now I'm going to kind of reorganize here. I'm going to set that aside. We get the cases out, roll the cylinders, got to bolt to the bottom half. We'll torque those down so we get an accurate, bore diameter. And then I'll show you how to measure them with a bore gauge. We'll get that set up and going, but for now, I'm just going to get this stuff put together and get us ready to go for some measuring over here. So I got the case halves bolted together, just how they would go together for assembly. There's the dowels are in there to line the halves up. I got my stud girdle in there that I run. Everything's torqued down and clean. So what I'm going to do is I need to measure these bores all the way through, 1 through 5, and no bearing in there. We're just going to get the actual bore diameter of the cases themselves. And what we'll use to do that is some snap gauges, or some T gauges, snap T gauges, whatever. They're called a couple different things. But what you can do is these compress so you can get into an inner diameter, and then you turn down the locking knob here by my pinky, and it'll hold these two pieces in, two anvils in, and you put it in the bore and it snaps out, and then you lock it down, and then you can mic that distance to get your starting number, and I'll show you what we'll do with that number on the micrometer over there. Dial bore gauge I got set. These are super easy to use. You just need to find out the right combination of anvils and spacers to get in the reading zone that you need. They don't have a ton of travel, so you have to basically figure out what size you need to start with, which is what we're going to use these for. And you got to get yourself within roughly 50 thou is what the travel is on this one. So if you look real close, you'll see my gauge here for the dial. Get the glare off there if we can. So I'm just going to use my finger to push on the anvil down here, and I'll show you how much travel we got. So we're at 25 thou there. If I push it in my hand here, I can go. Sorry, I'm fumbling with my other hand. All right, here we go. So I push in on it. We can go down to 0 and back to about 25. That's about the most travel we got. It's just that little button right there. So we need to get our first dimension to be able to set this up at roughly our starting number, or 0, and then we'll go from there. For now, we'll snap this in the bores, or in the journal bores, and we'll figure out where we need to set our micrometer at. Okay, first thing we're going to do here is take our telescoping gauge, our little snap T, and we're going to press these guys down, turn our locking knob. Now you see they stay in there. Now we're going to get our inside bore diameter. Hear them snap out. We're just going to give it a little bit of wiggling around to make sure we're centered and not in the oil groove in the middle of the cases. I'm not going directly up and down. I'm going to try to go at an angle across both sides. And you can double check your measurement to make sure your cases aren't out of round. But right now we just need a starting point for our micrometer to set our bore gauge. So now that I got that in there, we'll tighten the locking knob down again. Nice and snug. Now you don't want to be super aggressive pulling this out because you can still move them. It's just friction lock. That's it. I'll go to the micrometer, we'll measure our distance, and we'll pick a number, a rounded number, so that it's not just on some odd half number. We'll pick a round number to set it because that'll get us close enough for our 0 point for our bore gauge. Alright. Now we're back over at the bench, and I had time to clear my throat out. we're just going to take our micrometer here and we're going to measure what our inside bore diameter is on our cases. And then we'll be probably within, 1 or 2 thou, whatever it takes to get to like a good zero number, a good even number you can work with. So we're going to mic it quick. You got to be super careful miking this because you can, like I said, this is just friction locked in place. You can squeeze these and change your dimension. So we're just going to go till we touch. Right there. And we are at 1 inch, 400, 25, 50, 75, 95. 1 inch, 495, there's 500. So that's actually a good number that we landed on there. So we're going to start at 1 inch. We'll write that down. So our case bore starting number will be 1.4950. So that is what we're going to lock our mic down at. Make sure we stay on our number there. We'll lock our mic down to the little lock right here. Now, we're going to take and put this in a vise just to hold it, and then we are going to set up our bore gauge to fit in there and have that dimension read 0. Then when we stick this in the case bores themselves, we'll be able to tell, this will be zeroed, we'll be able to tell which way of 0 we're going, plus or minus, to get the actual size of that bore will be 1 inch, 4.950, plus or minus, whatever. Make sense? We're just looking for variations from 1.4950 because this isn't a dead-on accurate starting measurement because of what we're using to get our starting number. Like I said, this is just to get us in the ballpark. But now that we know we can set our 0, this is a hard number to work with, 1.4950. So when this is at 4.950, it'll be 0. So if I'm measuring and I get a 4.951, 4.949, somewhere in there, now we'll get our accurate number. All right, now we're over at the vise. The mic is just in here to be held. I don't have a third hand here. All we need to do now is take our bore mic. We're going to stick our anvils down in here. And you got to kind of steady it, and you got to watch the needle. So what I'm looking for is once these are in between the micrometer, I'm watching the needle now, and I'm looking for its farthest movement in basically the shortest measurement. We're pretty close to where our 0 point's going to be already. It just takes a little finesse. We're looking where the needle basically maxes out. See it? I don't know how well you can see this with me in the way here. We're not on 0 right now, but just watch how the needle travels farther one way and it maxes out and goes the other way. We want to find that max travel point, because that's actually where it's at its shortest point here. That's how you know you got the right measurement. So we're going to be a little over here. We're within half a thou right now. Keep giving her a little movement. A little more. Goes to 0 is our max compressed travel number. Back a little bit the other way. Just a touch. There we go. Our tightest measurement is 0. So we'll lock our lockdown for the face. Double check. Right there. So now we know this will read 0 at 1 inch 4/950. Either side of 0 on this face now will tell us plus or minus from that number in thousandths of an inch. Actually, 10 thousandths of an inch. That makes sense? I don't know if I'm describing this right. 1/10 of a thou. There. We'll get that out of the way. So now we'll go over to the cases and we'll start measuring bores. So we're ready to measure our first bore. This will be, motor's upside down. This is the left side, so this will be my number 1 main. Got my stuff set here. Got my little cheater marks on here. If we're this side of 0, we're getting tighter, we're getting smaller. If we're this side of 0, we're getting bigger. And with these mains, you got to make sure you're not getting into the oil groove, obviously. But we're looking for the same thing. We're going to look for our smallest reading. Right there. So we're at 1, 2, 3.5 thou. We'll go write that down. And same process all the way through. At some point I'm going to run out of room and I'm going to have to go to the other end. What's coming from the other side? Now that we got all our measuring done, all I got written here is my notes for my 14950 0 point off my bore gauge. I just need to add this to that number, and that's the actual bore size I got, an actual measurement. So we'll figure out, we'll do one quick here. So we got 1 inch 495 plus 2.5 thou. So we're 95, 96, 97, 1.4, 97, 5. Now all we got to do is minus our journal, subtract our journal from the cases. That'll give us the difference. Divide that by 2. That's the bearing thickness we need minus our oil clearance we want. So I'll do the math quick. So this is how it figures out. Got our case number. That's our bore size. Our journal diameter. There's the difference, 0.1204. Now that's the difference between the two. Now we need to put bearings in that blank area. We want to minus our oil clearance from there. So for easy math purposes, if we're running a 2 thou oil clearance, we're going to minus 2 thou. Off of that, we get 0.1184. Divide that by 2 because you need, that's the total space available. Divided by 2 because you got to have, a bearing on each side. There's the number we need for a bearing with our oil clearance included. The thing about oil clearance people get confused on is they hear, say you're going to run 2 thou oil clearance. It's not 2 thou per side. It's not 2 thousandths all the way around. You're not measuring clearance on one side of the crank or one side of the case. That's the entire clearance available. So that's 1 thou all the way around. If you're running 3 thou clearance, you got 1.5 thou all the way around. It's not a one side number. That's total clearance. These are hard numbers that you just add, subtract from. So to maintain a 2,000th oil clearance with case bore that size, journal diameter that size, space available, minus our bearing or oil clearance we want, space available with clearance divided by 2 for the bearings, we need a bearing that's 0.59 and 2/10. So this is where you can play with your oil clearance now. So you can do all this ahead of time, just use 2,000ths as your generic number. You could use 4,000ths if you want. This is where you will adjust whatever you want your oil clearance to run at. 2,000ths isn't too far off from where I will stay, but we'll figure the number out for everything and see where we're at, and then we'll try to maintain the same clearance on all of these. If it's easier to get to 2.5 thou, I might run that. I run a thicker oil, so a little bit thicker or a bigger clearance is fine. But that's the simplistic version, we'll say, of doing oil clearances with hard numbers and not just using the color coding system that Suzuki uses. It works, but if you're not going to run factory specs, or you want to change things up, or sometimes things wear a little bit. Your crank journal, maybe that's wearing down a thou, or maybe it's a half thou off of that. I don't think that'd be likely, but the cases, they should stay the same. They got a bearing in there, but you just never know how things can change. And you also need to keep in mind, like my motor, I don't run a cooling system. So that motor itself, even with methanol, it might run a little warmer just in general, just kind of radiant heat. So you can take into consideration how hot your motor runs and add clearance based appropriately for that. But I'm going to go ahead and start working on getting rod bore sizes. I got the rod journal measurements already, but we'll go from there. I had to do this twice because we had a slight mishap with the Green River. But yeah, I'm going to finish filling in my cheat sheet here, and then we'll get going on figuring out what color bearings I actually got to order to get these clearances. I believe you can look at some of the manuals. They'll tell you that a green bearing, a black bearing, whatever, it'll give actual bearing thickness, so you can reference that number. And if it happens to be a green one, then so be it. If it happens to be a black bearing, then so be it. But you got your hard number. You just need to know the actual bearing thickness that corresponds to the colors they offer. I got my math done here, and I've been busy watching TV while trying to do this, so I'd say forgive me for the time delay, but there is no time delay for you guys. But it works out to, if I want a 2 thou oil clearance, I need a bearing that's about 59 thou thick. Now, if I or you want to increase your oil clearance, say you want to run 3 thou, you need to minus half a thou from each bearing. Half a thou on one side, half a thou on the other side gives you 1,000ths total more clearance. So these are my base numbers to start with. Take some things into consideration. I'll make my adjustment from there. I like doing 2 thou for my math layout. That's just an easy, quick number to see where I'm going to end up at. And I can decide from there, looking at the bearing sizes available, what I actually want to run. Went through and got the inside diameter on the rods and figured out my clearance for what I want for bearings and got my numbers all recorded. So, like I said, as long as you have the hard numbers, you can manipulate your clearance to whatever you want it to be. And you can do it individual. Don't be afraid if you end up with, like, one journal you're running a green bearing and the other 3 are blacks. The bearing thicknesses do vary, so you may have to fudge things around a little bit with bearing colors. You might not run all one color on the rods, all one color on the mains. You might be moving some of them around, or not moving them, but you might end up with different colors throughout the motor to get the clearance you want to maintain. You do want all the clearances to be the same all the way across, but you might need different colors to achieve that based on rod size. Rods are all pretty consistent because it's a high-end manufacturer. They can one at a time hit each one, get it right to spec. Cranks from the factory, usually pretty good. Sometimes you got one that might be just a touch small, or three that are a touch big, however you want to look at it. But for the most part, everything really runs consistent. Suzuki is pretty good about, making some quality stuff, go figure. But you just want the hard numbers to know what you want to run for a clearance. Oil clearance, it's up in the air. There's people all over the place that say tighter is better. People say looser is better. Me personally, I run way loose. I run a good oil. And you see in my bearings from 2 years of use, I'm replacing them just for the sake of doing it at this point. But that 2 thou, like I said, is my magic number just to do some quick math. Honestly, I'm probably going to run closer to 3 thou again. That's what I ran these on last time. So that number probably sounds huge if you look at factory specs where they call, I think they're like 1.5 thou to 2 thou is like the high end. We're not doing what they intended these bikes to do, so that's why I'm doing this. You can also, people might disagree with this, and I know, I'm not going to name them. A high-end engine builder specializing in 1000 stuff, you can use 2 different color bearings on one journal. I said it. I can say in your cases. Let's say you want to run 2 thou clearance all the way across, and you're doing your math, you got your bearing numbers figured out, and you get one bearing that's like, man, it's like, this one's 2 thou, this one's 2 thou, this one's like 2 thou and 3/10, then 2 thou, whatever. And the next size bearing thicker gets you under 2 thou. So you're in that middle window. You can change out 1/2 of a bearing to get that clearance to 2 thou. You just want to make sure you do it on the bottom side of the cases, the load side. That's where you want to maintain the clearance that's most critical, because as that, the force is all coming down on these cranks, and you want the bearing to have its most amount of oil for cushion on the bottom side. People disagree a lot with some of the stuff I do and say. It's just what I do works. I don't know. You gotta kind of I'm not saying my way is the best or better than anybody else's. I'm just trying to show you a way. So this is my way. If you find you want to follow somebody else that does something different, maybe a little better, there's plenty of people that are smarter and faster than me you could ask. But this is just how I do it and how I figure things and how I try to reason out what I'm doing to make things work. So with that said, we have now our hard numbers on our sheet. We know what I need to get for bearings, and I'm going to go order some stuff up, and we're going to wait for the heater just kicked on, and we're going to wait for the rings to get here, and then we can start cleaning this mess up. I got to go through the cylinder head yet. Like I said, I wanted to check that out, but that's it. That's bearing clearance. So that's it. Like I said, guys, I just show you how to do this stuff. I'm getting over being sick and out in the garage, just kind of trying to make progress on my own garage built crap and show you how I do it along the way. Don't take anything too serious. Don't take anything to heart. Everything's up for debate. I'm just here to try to help you make better decisions and spend your money wise, because I'm not rich, and if you're watching me, you're probably not rich. So if you can do some of this stuff yourself, save some money. Building motors is not rocket surgery. People pay big money to have big power motors done. Understandable. I'll never knock another shop that is established for doing what they do. But for us budget garage guys, sometimes we just got to do it ourselves, and some of the things we do isn't always looked on in the highest light. But for now, we're going to keep going with what I've been doing and showing you more. If you like this kind of nerdy tech kind of stuff, I got another video I think I'm going to do about when the rings get here, actually, about rings and cylinder finish and some different things that matter when it comes to that. So hopefully you dig the tech stuff. it's still snowing out, and we're not going to be racing anytime soon, so this is what I got to work with. Hope you enjoyed it. If you got any questions, ask. I know I missed some stuff. Again, I misspeak. I talk fast. I forget to put stuff in. My brain and my mouth aren't connected all the time, so have fun with it. Take it for what it is. Enjoy the video.